All right. Now, at some point, you tell your wife, you're like, hey, I'm gonna quit my job at Signify and I'm gonna start RoadGoat.
Yeah.
Is that talk to us about that transition? I'm curious how that went.
Well, pretty much my entire career, I was like, I was working with these devices that were, connected, internet connected devices that were, and you look at the data that all these devices create, and they're all location tagged. And so I really started to learn a lot about location based data and the market for it when I was
Okay.
at Philips. And so, at the side of my head, I thought, wait a second, all this location data kind of tells a really interesting story, both about the people, the data the people that data is connected to, but also the places. So what type of people are going to that place? What sort of interactions are they having in that place?
Okay.
You can look at a person's data and get a sense of who they are. And hopefully in a non-creepy way, but I just thought, the very, very interesting side of that hasn't been tapped into. The other thing is that we have all these, as a person, we have accounts on all these different websites. We've got our social media, we've got our Fitbits, we've got, data kind of harnessed in all these places. And the idea for me was to, it was a hypothesis, can we aggregate all this data and tell one story with what, the location data in there has for us? And so I started experimenting kind of on the side of Philips about, bringing all my data in from Facebook, Instagram, Fitbit, and all these other locations, and basically creating one profile with that.
And are you experimenting because you're just curious and you like to build products and you like to do things, or are you thinking, I want to build a company?
I wasn't thinking that originally with it.
Okay. Okay.
It was more kind of learning.
Okay.
I shared that out with some people, and people started getting really into kind of like creating this
Ah,
history of where they've been.
ah,
And suddenly, it became apparent like how powerful this could be.
okay.
After just kind of sharing it with a couple hundred people, what we started to see is that very quickly we were able to identify the coolest places to go all over the world, just based on where people's histories. So it was unearthing like a lot of like what's the coolest towns to go to in Vermont or Massachusetts or France.
When you're sharing and you're getting friends to kind of buy into this, did you already form the entity at that point? Was it a company yet, or it's still just kind of a project?
That's kind of the turning point was right there. So that once we got enough people on and saw that this was like interesting, then okay, this can go like a lot of places from here.
And were you sharing it like you were sharing it through social media, and you had kind of a social media buy-in or a social media following, and you're thinking, okay, I got enough people interested.
No, it was just kind of through a private network and
Wow.
just testing like how people were using it and talking to friends about it and people wanting to get in on using it.
Okay.
So it kind of grew from there, and then we decided to turn it into a company.
Who's we?
Uh,
Who's we?
there were a couple engineers that I was kind of like working with on this to build it out at first.
How were you?
It was,
Do you mind me asking? How were you paying these engineers? Were they just kind of doing it for an exchange of equity, or you were personally bootstrapping the funds and paying these engineers? How were you doing that?
yeah, so it started off of bootstrapping. So they were, I kind of like connected with them online, and we were kind of experimenting with some of this stuff. And then we decided it's time to build the MVP based on like what we had seen.
Okay.
Um, and
Okay.
just to kind of take a step back, I mean, like what I really saw, the reason that got me going on this is that um, we don't really have anywhere on the web that tells a story about what a place is. Like if you think of a place as a person, something that has a personality, that attracts certain types of crowds and things like that. We have that for restaurants. So, we have like Google Places, we have Yelp, TripAdvisor. These are all like great for like identifying small businesses that are places that you would want to go. But when it comes to cities and towns and regions and countries, there's no one that's really kind of creating a data to illustrate what this place is all about.
Wow.
Uh,
Nobody. Okay. All right. All
and
right.
we thought we saw very early that the data is starting to tell really strong stories about these places. And if we open that data up to our users to even like give us, tell us, okay, this is like, a great place, a great city for nightlife. This is a great like foodie destination. This is a college town.
Mhm.
Those sorts of labels can not only be useful on our own platform as a B2C platform, but actually the rest of the travel industry is really missing a lot of this contextual information.
Wow.
that would help them, convert their users to be more engaged.
When you guys were looking, I'm sure you tried to find a competitor. I'm sure you're looking around thinking, surely somebody else is doing this. And the more study you did, you're like, wow, nobody's really doing this.
Yeah, it was really weird. And then, like, funny enough, we were actually in contact with uh, another company that did something similar, and we were going to actually pay them to access some of their data to put on our site.
Mm.
And we started testing it, and before long, we realized that the quality of that data and the depth of it was just not good enough to even put on our site. And this is actually like a big name company. I don't want to say the name
Okay.
here.
Okay.
Um, but the end of the conversation actually turned the other way. So instead of us, taking their data and putting on our site, we're now having conversations about supplying them with our data to make their information more useful.
How about that? Well, okay, great. So you saw a need. Nobody else is really doing it. You get this going with these developers. Now, at some at some point, you decide to leave your full-time paying job and dive all in, right? At some point, you had to do that.
Yeah.
Were you producing revenue yet from this new company when you did that, or you dove in before revenue started hitting? I'm just curious.
No, before revenue. In fact, we are before revenue right now. We're just launching the B2B side of
Okay.
the business.
Okay.
So the first step was establishing a platform that could basically harness a lot of really interesting data about
Okay.
places.
Okay.
Now we have that built, and now we can open that up to the rest of the world.
Wow. So you're still pre-revenue, but you've been doing this now for a year. When did you leave your full-time gig? A year ago?
Yeah, about a year ago.
Woo. How'd that go over with the wife when you're like, hey, listen, I'm not going to make any money for a year?
It was a tough conversation, but she's super supportive of all of it. Um, I caught a couple of lucky breaks earlier in my career. I mentioned some of the stuff that I started within Philips kind of took off well, and was able to save up enough to be able to,
Okay.
uh,
Be
you know,
able to eat and pay the bills.
yeah. I mean, and I also thought about fundraising right away, and I just didn't think it was the right thing to do, given I had the flexibility to not do it.
Agreed. Oh no, I agree. So you haven't taken on any seed money or any friends or family rounds or anything. It's all yours, bootstrap.
Yeah, we're going to be raising seed money now with the launch of the kind of B2B side of the business, but before that, no.
Okay. All right. And are you still using the same developers too? Are they still part of the team, or you've gone through a few? I'm just curious.
It definitely was like a process, kind of like settling into the right team. No, we had like a good group of guys that we started with, but they were very kind of like on the junior side, and so the product kind of like reflected that initially.
Okay. Okay.
And now we've really got a great team put together right now with some real tech experts and kind of getting us prepared for the post funding like big growth.
And so I just want to, if you don't mind, I really want to just dive in there just a little bit, because I think a lot of our listeners now, they're tapping into the Riderflex podcast because they're curious about your company, sure, but they also are entrepreneurs and they have their own ideas, and they're always like, okay, well, how'd you do that? Like, how'd you bridge that gap from job to this? And then did you bootstrap it? Did you pay those developers? Did you have to give them equity? Like, how'd you structure that? How'd you survive? And so that's why I ask a lot of questions, because right in here, right at this stage where you're at, is where I think a lot of people, that they're scared right there, right? Or
Yeah.
they don't, or they only have so much money saved up, right? There's only, they can only go so far. So right in here is where everybody kind of gets either scared or changes their mind or goes back and gets a job.
Yeah.
And so were you creative when you're calling these developers, you're like, hey man, yeah, I got this really cool idea, but I can't really pay anything, but come on, come help me. Like how I'm just curious how that conversation went.
I think you bring up a really good point. I think that is probably the hardest thing in terms of like starting all of this. And like, I think on that front, like, for people who are pretty early, like pretty young,
Mm-hmm.
you may think that you want to go into the business side, but if you're working with tech, I would say like it does not hurt to actually like do your education in engineering. It doesn't mean that that's what you have to do the rest of your life, but it gives you the flexibility to sort of like quasi start stuff
Right.
without having to rely on other people. In my case, I spent a lot of time kind of self-learning a lot of the basic
Okay.
um, uh, web stuff. As I told you, I did some of it in
Right.
college a long time ago. It's completely different now.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time being able to do that, so I'm not so reliant on other people, first of all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could
But
kind of like in your case now, like if you hired a developer, you could know yourself whether or not he was any good, probably pretty quick at this point.
as long as it's like the front end design stuff, the back end stuff is a lot more.
Gotcha. Okay.
Over my head.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's a good point. I've talked to a few entrepreneurs that aren't developers or tech guys, and but they're trying to start a tech company, and that is hard to do. Trying to be a founder of a tech company and not being a former developer of some kind is tough.
Yeah, and I think it's very cliche to say, but invest the time in finding the great people. It just I've even seen it on your other podcasts. Other people say the same thing, and like
Yes.
I can't stress that enough. If you don't do that up front, you're gonna end up paying for it really bad.
Isn't that the truth?
Once you find good people, it just completely changes the course of the company.
And now you're now you're at this point where you're like, hey, I think we're ready to do a friends and family round, so to speak, or seed round, whatever you're going to call it. Are you ready to give now? I'm assuming you have almost all the equity at this point. Are you ready to hand out equity? Or are you doing this on a convertible note? What are you planning on doing? I'm just curious. Can you share any of that? Can you share any of that?
Yeah, I mean, we plan to raise a convertible note probably around $400K.
Okay.
I would like to build a tech center out in Barcelona, Spain. My mother lives there. I've got a lot of connections there, and
cool.
It's just a super vibrant place with people from all over the world there. It's also obviously a lot more affordable than New York.
I see.
That's kind of like the vision of kind of like how to build the tech team.
When you quit your job and you started this RoadGoat, what'd your parents say? I'm curious how that conversation went.
A lot of like awkward questions for sure.
They're like, what's it going to be called? And you're like, RoadGoat. And I could just hear your dad going, what? What do you mean?
And like, what do you mean you're not gonna like make money off of it? Right? for what? For like a few weeks, or what do you mean?
Right. Oh, it's so funny. I still remember the day I had that conversation with my wife when I said, listen, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go all in on Riderflex. And I still remember her saying, okay, well, how much money are we going to make next year? And I said, I have no idea. Those are always fun, scary, exciting conversations, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Definitely.
Okay. All right. Okay. So now when do you think you'll start, when are you going to be revenue? When is it going to be out there to the market where people can, start paying you? When is that? What's the timeline on that?
We should be hitting revenue by the middle of 2020. So
okay.
It's going to take a few months to fundraise, and at the same time, we're going to be building the B2B product. Then we have to get basically sales out there to give big travel companies this data so that they can interact with it. So
is that your target customer, travel companies?
Yeah, primarily big travel sites that can use more contextual information about different locations to help their own users.
And there's not going to be a B2C platform in this deal?
There is. So that's what that's what the last year is the B2C platform.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Kind of the way it works is we have our B2C platform and people are telling us all this interesting information about places. And then we're augmenting that data with some data science that we do about places. And we package that into like one database that now we can hand over to the travel industry and say like, hey, by the way, this like hotel that you're booking is, this one is in the like town that's like for people, partying in their 20s, and this one like the family town, and this hotel is in a not so safe town, so you might want to like double.
I see. Okay, so I get it now. Sorry, I was lost on that at first, but I see. So the B2C basically has been this platform to gather all this information that then is packaged up in this nice present that you're going to sell B2B. That's it. That's the short layman's terms version.
Yeah, we have over about 60,000 users right now on the B2C platform.
Okay, will you ever charge the consumer for anything? Will there, $1.99 to download or something or anything like that?
that's not the intention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just curious. Okay. And are you hoping that you get acquired at some point that, I don't know, whoever like comes along and writes you a big check? Is that the plan?
Maybe. I mean, it's not about the big check as much as it's like, really want to use this platform to kind of change the way that people travel. We really kind of like unearthed a lot of really interesting places that people didn't know about. Everyone kind of knows the big cities that are really attractive to go to. But as people get more aware of kind of different places to travel for weekends, kind of nice rural towns and things like that, that's where we can kind of like unearth a lot of really interesting data.
Yeah.
And I hope that, if we have the opportunity to be acquired one day, that it would be with a company that really wants to do something powerful with that.
The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. Our show can be heard just about anywhere these days, but you can visit riderflex.com and click on the podcast page to hear all the previous episodes and learn more about the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Contact us at the email address info@riderflex.com or 888-964-5876. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes.